Good morning, Mr. Castleton.
My pleasure, Your Honour. I appear with my learned friend, Mr. Wilcox, assisting Your Honour in relation to the Good Fire Tallangatta National Park inquiry.
Thank you. I'll just take any other appearances.
Your Honour, my name is Woodland. I appear for the Commissioner of the Rural Fire Service, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales.
Thank you, Ms. Woodland. That's the only other person appearing?
I believe so, Your Honour.
Yes.
Your Honour, this is the inquiry into the cause and origin of the Good Fire. The fire takes its name from a fire trail known as Good, located within the rugged bushland of Durangle in close proximity to its suspected area of origin. The region of Durangle is located to the south of Tallangatta National Park and on the western side of the Guruk and Wadbilliga National Park with the township of Cooma, 63 kilometres southwest, and the township of Breadbow, 30 kilometres lying west. The hamlet of Durangle sits in rugged alpine wilderness on the doorstep of the Snowy Mountains. A large portion of the area is occupied by bushland of mountain ash, gums, wattle and grasslands with sporadic farmland and rural private property scattered either side of Durangle and Peakview Road. A number of unsealed fire trails, including the Good Fire Trail, run in and out of the bushland with varying degrees of accessibility. The Good Fire burned predominantly in the Snowy Monero local area, encompassed within the lands of the Naringo people. Over the course of its life, the fire merged with a number of other fires burning, including the Badger, Hellhole, Jinden, Inalloy Trail, Peakview Road and Darmody fires. According to the material shortly to be tendered within the Coronial brief of evidence, the fire burned for approximately 2 months between late December 2019 and early March 2020 and impacted over 42,000 hectares of public and privately owned land. Approximately 50 structures were damaged or destroyed by this fire, including 8 destroyed residences. The Good Fire also had an enormous impact upon native wildlife and flora, including the obliteration of important koala habitat and wildlife sanctuaries. Your Honour, significantly, on 23 January 2020, 3 remarkable and well-respected American aircrew were tragically killed when their Lockheed C-130 water tanker crashed in the Peakview district while trying to protect one such sanctuary, the Two Thumbs Wildlife Trust Koala Sanctuary, from fire. This fire not only impacted the lives and communities of Australians, but it has also forever affected the families and loved ones of these 3 men on the other side of the world. Australia was not their country, they were visitors. They died defending our country and people in what was an unprecedented bushfire catastrophe, images of which had made front-page news around the world. The inquest into the manner and cause of the deaths, that is, Captain Ian Macbeth, First Officer Paul Clyde Hudson, and Flight Engineer Rick De Morgan Jr. will be heard in March next year. A more detailed outline of the circumstances of their deaths will be provided at that time. Having acknowledged this, I need to emphasise that this hearing is limited to 2 issues: the origin of the fire and its cause. Whilst these opening submissions will place the origin and cause into a broader context of what happened in the aftermath, this hearing will not examine the adequacy or otherwise of the response to the Good Fire. Today, Your Honour will hear evidence from the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Senior Constable Ben Waldron, Detective Technical Inspector Sasha Debnan from the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command, and RFS Fire Investigator John Smith. These will be the only witnesses to give oral evidence. In addition, Your Honour will have the benefit of material contained in the brief of evidence to be tendered shortly, which contains witness statements, operational records of responding agencies, and a range of other documents from those involved in the management and investigation of the fire, as well as statements from those who were impacted by it in some way. Once Your Honour has completed this hearing, those assisting Your Honour will review the evidence and issues raised in each matter and determine which issues will proceed to further and more detailed consideration through representative case studies. The dedicated hearing to representative case studies will occur commencing on the 5th of September 2022. Your Honour, can I come now to the fire and how it started? During the month leading up to the ignition of the Good fire, storm activity increased in the southern region of New South Wales, generated from weather events and from the significant fires burning in southern New South Wales. Numerous lightning strikes were recorded between 27 and 29 December 2019 in the Durangle area and in the vicinity of the Good Fire Trail. I'll just have displayed now, Your Honour, a map which outlines some of the lightning strikes recorded at that time. The Good Fire is believed to have started on 29 December 2019 in an area south of a property known as Rose Retreat at 2116 Durangle Road in Durangle, a private holding owned by Jane and Angus Ferguson. This Google satellite image shows the general area of origin and surrounds. The red marker to the south identifies the suspected area of origin. The location of Rose Retreat is identified by the middle pointer arrow. Your Honour will also observe the Good Trail to the left, running north-south, and Durangle Road above, running east to west. Your Honour may also be able to see Limekiln Creek winding southward of Durangle Road. Your Honour, this next Google image, which I'll have displayed now, may give Your Honour a better appreciation of the topography of the area, which is distinguished by various ridges. Your Honour will see several rural homesteads in cleared areas, separated by areas of bushland consisting of mainly eucalyptus trees and undergrowth, throughout which a network of dirt roads and fire trails run. Your Honour, the red marker depicts the coordinates of what Your Honour will come to learn was the location of a lightning-struck tree. Although no one saw the ignition, Your Honour, local resident Jane Ferguson of Rose Retreat monitored lightning strikes in the Durangle area on 27 December 2019 on her phone app Lightning Near Me, taking some screenshots. On 28 January 2019, between 5:30 p.m. and 6 p.m, Jane herself witnessed lightning strike 1 kilometre south of her chicken yard when she was out feeding her chickens. She described the sound as deafening. The following day, that is the 29th of December 2019, at around 1:05 p.m, Jane Ferguson heard a helicopter hover over to the southeast of her house in the direction of her neighbour's property, Limekiln Cottage, at 2118 Durangle Road, and she observed a large plume of smoke. She took this photograph, Your Honour, which will be displayed shortly, at about 1:17 p.m. on the 29th of December. And that's taken southeast of the homestead at Rose Retreat. Your Honour, after first calling her neighbour, Jane Ferguson relayed this information to her husband Angus, then a 25-year member of the RFS and Deputy Captain of the Durangle Brigade, who in turn relayed this information to the Cooma Rural Fire Control Centre. Angus was provided with a grid reference which positioned the fire adjacent to his property and that of his neighbours at 2118 Durangle Road. 2118 Durangle Road. On returning home from Canberra about an hour later, Angus Ferguson saw a number of trucks from the RFS and Fire and Rescue New South Wales stationed near his house. In the statement Angus provided to the court, he stated that he observed no fire activity in the paddock surrounding his house or the large hill to the south of the paddocks around his house. He could see large plumes of smoke rising to the south and east of the hill. Mr Ferguson then spoke with the Senior Deputy Captain of the Durangle Brigade, Robert Boaty, who informed him that the size and direction of the fire had not yet been determined. Mr Ferguson then drove south through his property along an internal fire trail together with his neighbour and brigade member Mark Saunders. Angus Ferguson described the following. I observed active fire burning on both the east and western side of the ridgeline. However, more appeared to be burnt on the eastern side. I could see fire burning to the east close to Limekiln Cottage, below us, and fire trucks working on that part of the fire. The active fire on the western side of the track was burning in a north and northwesterly direction and was quite low in intensity and speed. I recall that at this time the fire was still well south of a spring-fed dam in that particular paddock. We continued driving and the active fire edges on both sides ceased, and we continued to drive into heavily burnt country with no active fire. This part of my property was heavily damaged by fire with no ground cover, no foliage or crown left in any of the trees. The landscape was entirely black with nothing left but burnt trees. From my experience, I believe this part of my property was impacted by a very hot and fast-moving fire that had consumed everything in its path. Mr. Ferguson continued driving along the trail until arriving at a hut towards the rear of his property, which was untouched by the fire. Yet the landscape around the hut was entirely burnt, right up to the edges of the hut. He assumed that the water-bombing helicopter observed by his wife earlier had protected the hut. Mr. Ferguson took a number of photographs between 29 December 2019 and 12 January 2020 from Rose Retreat, showing smoke plumes and some of the damage caused by the fire. I'll have displayed now, for Your Honour's benefit, a selection of those photographs taken by Mr. Ferguson. That's the hut, Your Honour, to which I referred a moment ago that was not impacted by the fire. Your Honour, just after 2 p.m. on the 29th of December 2019, the same day the Fergusons became aware of the fire, 4 members of the Rapid Aerial Response Team, or RART, were deployed to gain intelligence on the fire to confirm its size and location. Information gleaned from that initial aerial reconnaissance was used to coordinate a ground response. One of the crewmen, Thomas Phillips, provided a statement to the court wherein he described the scene from the air as follows. Once in the air, crown fires were seen and estimated to be at least 60 hectares in size and spreading. The fires had been tucked away in agricultural land, and I estimate that they must have been burning for some time, for at least the night before. Your Honour also had the benefit of the statement of another crewman, Michael Horniman, who stated that the flame height on the fire edge was about 3 to 4 metres high, with thick smoke rising, visible from 30 to 40 kilometres away. Given the size of the fire, Michael formed the view that it had possibly ignited the afternoon before and burned about 20 acres before settling overnight and increasing its activity on the 29th of December, the day that it was reported. New South Wales Rural Fire Service images taken from the aerial reconnaissance show the scene of the fire on that afternoon. The fire at this stage was significant in size and burning in rough and dense terrain. I'll just have some of those displayed now for your Honour's benefit. I come now, Your Honour, to the fire's progression. The first of the incident mapping produced by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service on the 29th of December at 1:44 p.m, 2:02 p.m. and 3 p.m, which I'll now have displayed to Your Honour, shows the fire edge represented by red dots and demonstrates the rapid growth of the fire in the first 2 hours from the time that it was reported to authorities. Your Honour will see the proposed control lines represented by black crosses extending eastward and up to Durangle. road and surrounding assets as depicted by the blue boxes. According to Detective Inspector Debnam, the fire continued burning within these containment lanes for a number of weeks following the original ignition. The scale and spread of the fire is best illustrated in a series of fire progression maps produced by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service that I will have displayed on the screen now. Your Honour, the first 24-hour period of the fire's progression is from 29 to 30 December 2019 and is captured in this first fire progression map, which is found at page 44 of the brief of evidence. Your Honour will see the fire origin to the top left of the map marked by a diamond icon slightly below the words "good, good fire." The fire at this point was mapped as spreading 2 kilometres to the southeast. Your Honour will also see the development of the Badger Forest Road fire to the south, shaded in orange. These two fires would merge in the days to follow. I note that these maps are described as fire progression mapping for the Badger Forest fire, but it also captures the progression of the Good Good Road fire. Between 31 December 2019 to 1 January 2020, the fire had spread approximately 7.5 kilometres southeast as depicted in this next fire progression map found at page 48 of the brief of evidence. Your Honour will notice by comparison that by this time the Badger Forest Road fire had made a significant progression, spreading an extraordinary 35 kilometres downslope overnight. The fire progression report noted that it was extraordinarily extreme and anomalous for a fire to spread 35 kilometres downslope overnight in a period of less than 12 hours. This fire was said to have caused storm activity that possibly affected the spread of the Good Good fire. I propose to show Your Honour now a map depicting the number of lightning strikes recorded in the relevant area over this 24-hour period. By 5 January 2020, the Good Good fire had absorbed areas of the Badger, Hellhole, Ginton, Inaloy and Darmody fires. It had consumed an area of over 26,000 hectares and consisted of 3 distinct areas as can be observed in this next fire progression map. Which are depicted by the red circles, Your Honour. Over the next few days through to 8 January 2020, those 3 distinct areas had merged into one. And I'll demonstrate that now by this particular fire progression map. Then came 23 January 2020, which saw an increase in fire behaviour with strong, persistent winds gusting up to 67 kilometres per hour. It was on this day that Captain Ian Macbeth, First Officer Paul Hudson and Flight Engineer Rick De Morgan Jr. were diverted from the Adaminaby Complex fire to attend the Good Good fire to drop retardant from their Lockheed 7130 air tanker. The inquest into their deaths will examine the circumstances of that mission and the subsequent crash. But for the purposes of this inquiry, I show the court a fire progression map on the day of the air crash, which is found at page 65 of the brief of evidence. The fire was mapped as spreading approximately 5 kilometres to the southeast. This next map, found at page 67 of the brief of evidence, is a close-up of that image, where the location of the crash site is marked in proximity to the area affected by the fire. Over the course of the following week, until 31 January 2020, the fire continued to spread at small distances when the southern portion of the Good fire was reallocated to the Kydra Complex fire, shaded in dark grey in this next fire progression map for the 24-hour period commencing 30 January 2020. From 31 January 2022, that should be 2020, the Good fire continued to spread, but slowly at distances of up to 2.5 kilometres per day in various directions until it was declared out on 2 March 2020 at 4:55 p.m. The final fire progression map shows the extent of area overcome by the Good fire, and this progression map, Your Honour, is found at page 73 of the brief of evidence. And Your Honour sees the Good fire and particularly the Badger Forest Road fire. Turning, if I may, Your Honour, to the investigation into the cause and origin of this particular fire. As referred to earlier, the area of origin for the Good fire is believed to be in a remote area approximately 800 metres south of a property known as Rose Retreat at 2116 Durangle Road, Durangle, near the Good fire trail. The court will hear that RFS fire investigators Michael Futuro and John Smith attended the scene on 20 January 2020 to investigate the cause and origin of this fire. They conducted an examination of the suspected area of origin and were able to eliminate other potential causes for the fire, ultimately concluding that a fallen tree with lightning strike indicators was the likely ignition point for the fire. Mr. Smith will shortly speak to the photos that were taken during that examination, but I propose now to show the court one of those photographs that Mr. Smith will give evidence about. This particular photograph, Your Honour, shows the fallen tree believed to be the ignition point. Your Honour will hear of a distinct pattern of damage, including vertical ruptures, observed on the bark of the tree, and that those particular features were considered consistent with damage caused by lightning. A further indicator of lightning strike was a trench exploded out of the ground from the base of the trunk. The appearance of the trench, visible in this image, and the presence of ejected rocks each side of the trench pointed to a steam explosion, which we are expected to hear results when lightning travels through a green tree and instantly vaporises any moisture in the tissue underneath the bark, causing a steam explosion that expands the bark until the steam escapes through the ruptures caused. In this instance, the bark was left in place, but vertical ruptures were evident, extending the length of the trunk. Immediately adjacent to the base of the tree were indicators of a running fire. Armed with this information provided by the RFS, Detective Technical Inspector Sasha Debnam, in company with the officer in charge, Detective Senior Constable Ben Waldron, and Detective Senior Constable Robert Bruce, attended the specific point of origin on 18 February 2020 to conduct their own examination of the area. On arrival, they were able to locate the tree that matched the description provided by the RFS and obtained several photographs of the scene. The following day, that is the 19th of February 2020, Detective Inspector Debnam, Detective Senior Constable Bruce and RFS Inspector Reen Pete conducted an aerial reconnaissance of the site and surrounds. During that flight, a number of aerial photographs were taken, including a video of the general point of ignition, which I will now have played to the court. And this is found at tab 3, Annexure A. Please bear with me, Your Honour, we're just troubleshooting a technical difficulty.
No problem.
Your Honour, I might move on. Your Honour, it is anticipated that Detective Inspector Debnam will tell the court that a definitive point of origin was unable to be determined due to a number of factors, including the passage of time between the commencement of the fire and her examination of the scene on 18 February 2020, which may have affected the appearance of some fire indicators. Early reports received from aerial firefighters that this fire was not behaving in a typical manner may have also affected the interpretation of some fire indicators. Nonetheless, Detective Inspector Debnam's analysis of the scene led to the conclusion that the fire was likely started due to any one or a number of lightning strikes in the area which were recorded in the 48 hours prior to the report of the fire. In particular, all data from the investigation indicated that a fire has started within a 200 to 250 metre radius, generally north of a lightning strike recorded at 4:04 p.m. on the 28th of December 2019. This conclusion is corroborated by available lightning strike data provided by the RFS, which shows lightning activity in the vicinity of Durango on 28 December 2019. And I'll just have displayed now, Your Honour, a further image mapping particular lightning strike activity in the vicinity of Durango on the 28th of December. I should add, Your Honour, that Detective Inspector Debnam did not exclude the possibility of additional simultaneous points of ignition in nearby areas that were nominated by witnesses as being potential points of origin. Your Honour, that concludes my opening remarks in relation to the Good fire. Could I tender the brief, Your Honour, which I'm instructed will be marked Exhibit 59A?
Yes, thank you. Exhibit 59A.
And finally, Your Honour, during the opening, an image was displayed that was taken from Google Maps. I tendered that image as a new tab 12 to Exhibit 17, which comprises a number of photographs and videos relating to various fires from the far southern region.
Yes, thank you, Mr Castleton.
If it's appropriate, Your Honour, I propose now to call Detective Senior Constable Ben Warden, the officer in charge of the investigation.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you, Detective. Have a seat.
Detective, would you please state your full name, rank and station or unit you're presently attached to within the New South Wales Police Force?
Ben Waldron, Detective Senior Constable. I'm currently attached to Castle Hill Police Station.
Were you assigned in February of 2020 to conduct an investigation into the cause and origin of a fire that was to be known as the Good Fire?
Yes, I was.
And were you assigned as the officer in charge of that investigation?
Yes, I was.
And at that time, were you a Detective Senior Constable with the State Crime Command, and in particular a member of the arson unit?
Yes, I was.
And did you, as part of your investigations, come to produce a statement totalling 105 pages in length, which you signed on the 7th of June 2021?
Yes, I did.
And do you have a copy of that statement with you this morning, Detective?
Yes, I do.
Are there any matters that require correction?
No.
Can I just deal firstly with the steps that you took shortly after you'd been assigned as the officer in charge of the investigation to investigate what was the likely cause and origin of this particular fire, that is the Good Fire?
Yeah, so the first protocol in relation to a fire like this is to work out the cause and origin. So making sure RFS have turned up and done the cause and origin examination of the scene, get their data if they have, and then get our FETs or our forensic unit to do exactly the same thing.
And did your inquiries reveal that in mid-January, perhaps the 20th of January 2020, two RFS personnel attended the fire ground in that area of origin, believed origin for this particular fire?
That's correct.
And was one of those fire investigators that was investigating it on behalf of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, Mr. John Smith?
That's correct.
And did you speak with Mr. Smith at all?
No, I did not.
Did you speak with his colleague, Mr. Futuro?
No, I spoke to Rain Pete, who was the inspector at Cooma, and he provided us with all the details.
And as a result of those inquiries, did you come to learn that there was thought to be a general area of origin in relation to this particular fire?
That's correct.
And where was that?
South of the property of Rose Retreat.
And is Rose Retreat located at 2116 Durangle Road, Durangle?
2118 or 2116, it's on Durangle Road, yeah. And 2118 is directly behind.
And 2118, directly behind, is that occupied by a lady by the name of Amy Gordon and her partner?
That's correct.
And is that also known as Lime Kiln Cottage? Now, did you yourself undertake an inspection of that general area of origin?
Yes, I did.
And did you do that on or about the 18th of February 2020?
That's correct.
And who did you attend your ground-based inspection with, Detective?
Inspector Denman and Detective Senior Constable Bruce.
Right. And who is Detective Inspector Debnan?
She was in charge at that stage of the Southern Region response to the fires from the forensic side of things.
Is she a member of the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command within the New South Wales Police Force?
That's correct.
And is she, like you, a specialist investigator in relation to cause and origin of wildfire?
That's correct.
How would you describe the general topography or terrain in and around that area of general origin near to the property known as Rose Retreat?
It's very undulating, very unforgiving. Took us 3 to 4 hours to travel the short distance that we had to.
Were there any established fire trails to enable access into that general area of origin?
Not the direction we went, no.
You were on foot for a good part of it?
Yeah, for about the last 300 or 400 metres. Basically, we got to above the area of origin, being the highest point, and we worked our way back from there, looking at the indicators of the fire burning uphill, and kept travelling downhill towards where the lightning struck.
And
The tree was damaged.
as part of the ground-based inspection that you were undertaking at that time, did you use a serpentine methodology to track back to the suspected area of origin, or some other methodology?
This one wasn't as difficult because of the slope of the land, so you could always work backwards off the slope of the land. It wasn't a circular serpentine action; it was more of a wave down the hill, down towards a fire trail that had been cut off the Good fire trail.
As you're undertaking that ground-based inspection, Detective, did you see clear fire indicators of foliage freeze to identify a particular run of fire?
Freeze wraparound of burns on trees, sooting on rocks. It's quite a rocky terrain, so the best indicators were actually the rocks rather than the trees.
And did those rocks show angle of char?
Yes, they did.
Were there any confusing fire indicators as you've worked your way down towards the suspected area of origin, or not?
There was a fair backing fire. Because the fire burnt for so long, the fire had backed a fair way, back down towards where the fire trail was. But other than that, yeah, the run up the hill was pretty easy to determine.
And did you come to a point where there was identified a tree that may have been struck by lightning?
That's correct.
And this particular tree, prior to commencing your investigation on that day, had you been provided with specific latitude and longitude coordinates of a tree suspected to be struck by lightning and the origin of this particular fire by New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
That's correct.
And did you, on that occasion that you're undertaking your inspection, undertake an analysis of that particular tree?
We did, and we also looked in the general area as well for other trees as well.
And did you form a view on this day as to what may have caused this this particular tree to exhibit particular attributes?
Yes.
Right, and I'll just see if I can have shown some photographs. Now, just if the witness could be provided with the brief of evidence. Do we have a hard copy of the brief? And do we have a hard copy, President? No? All right. If it's really some photographs that Mr. Smith took, which just check that the officer, there's tab 5A in that brief of evidence. And these are, for Your Honour's benefit, found at pages 269-11. Now, I'll just take you firstly to page 269-15, Detective. Do you have that to hand?
Yes, I do.
I'll see if I can bring this particular photograph on scene. You may have seen this displayed as part of the opening.
Yes, I did.
Doing the best you can today, does that accord with your recollection of the particular tree that we're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Now, if you just go back to page 269-13. Now, on the day of your ground-based inspection, did you make observations similar to what is depicted in this photograph of that particular tree?
Yes, I did.
And in your opinion, what does that show, if anything?
It shows that, well, I suppose the best way to describe it is the cracking running down the tree. The fact that there's very limited burning of the tree, and the photo on 15, which is probably a bit better, you can see the timber that's been blown out to the left and the rocks and stuff that have come from the hole in the ground to the left of it. Down the
And
they're unburnt as well. So
those fractures and what you've described as blown out, what's your understanding as to the mechanism that may have caused that to occur?
it's the electronic volt from the lightning causes the liquid inside a tree to expand and blows it out, basically.
And when the liquid expands, it's heated, it creates steam, and then it, in effect, pushes out the bark to escape.
That's correct.
And is that why we see either in 269.13 what's termed to be fresh vertical rupture pattern,
Yes.
which you've described as vertical fractures? And in terms of, we go to 269.14, did you make any observations at the base of the tree that was consistent with perhaps an explosion similar to what you just described in your evidence a moment ago?
Yeah, so the light coloured timber that's from the tree heading to the top of the photo is what a part of the timber's been blown off the tree.
Apart from this tree, which you'd formed the view was struck by lightning, did you make any observations within perhaps a 200 or 250 metre radius of this tree, of any other trees that may have been struck by lightning?
We'd seen a number of trees that have been hit by lightning, but over varying times. This was the most recent because you could see the fresh timber.
Did you, like your colleague, Detective Inspector Dedman, form the view that the most likely cause of the ignition of the Good fire was from lightning?
From lightning and from that particular area because of the running of the fire up the hill.
Do you, like your colleague, Detective Inspector Dedman, not exclude multiple lightning strikes as the likely cause of the ignition of the Good fire?
No. There was multiple over the whole period.
And when we're talking the period, are we talking that period perhaps between 27, 28, 29 December 2019?
That's correct. And even later on the fire, there was images shown before of the fire getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Some of them are secondary, third, fourth ignitions in completely separate areas. Yeah.
Now, in terms of the progression of this particular fire, Detective, is it fair to say in its early stages it spread in a generally south-southeasterly direction?
That's correct, under a northwesterly.
Under a northwesterly prevailing wind, heading towards what was then known as the Badger Forest Road fire?
That's correct.
And did those two fires, that is the Good fire and the Badger Forest Road fire, eventually merge?
That's correct.
And do you know when that was or not?
No, not the exact time, no.
And in terms of damage to structures and buildings, how many buildings were damaged or destroyed?
So the initial data from the building impact analysis team was 48, but that was done before the fire was actually put out, and we ended up finding another 2, making it 50 structures.
And of those 50 structures, how many were residential homes? 8. And what area were they predominantly located in?
Off Peakview Road. So the fire never went north of Durangle Road, so it always stayed south.
And is Peakview, does it sit within the Snow Monero local government area? And in terms of the number of hectares that were burnt by this particular fire, was it in the order of 42,000 hectares?
Yes, that's correct.
And did this particular fire burn for approximately 64 days?
Yes,
Being declared out about the 2nd of March 2020?
that's correct.
And in terms of incident management, which fire control centre within the New South Wales Rural Fire Service was the incident control for this particular fire?
Incident control centre was run from Cooma.
And was a Section 44 declared in relation to this fire, or did this fire fall within an existing Section 44 declaration?
I think it was already, Cooma already had one running, and it formed part of that.
And who was the incident controller?
Jim Durant.
And was he a superintendent, to your understanding, within the New South Wales Rural Fire Service at that time? Now, just in terms of leading up to the ignition of the fire on or around the 28th or 29th of December 2019, how would you describe the environmental conditions at that time within the area we're concerned about?
It was extremely dry. It was very windy. We had multiple storms. Between the last 6 days of December, there was multiple fires from a northwest prevailing winds that was out of Minibee Badger. There was a whole stream of fires caused by.
Had this part of the state been in drought for some time? Do you
Yes, it
understand
had.
it?
And the majority of the storms that were coming through were quite dry storms. They weren't completely dry, but they were fairly dry.
By that, are you referring to the phenomena that sometimes referred to as dry lightning?
That's correct.
And do you understand how that works? Or?
Yeah, it's a storm where there is no rain, predominantly. So.
Finally, in terms of excluding other potential causes for the ignition, did you exclude human activity as a possible cause?
Yes, there was nothing anywhere near there that it wasn't accessible. It took us 3 hours to get within 800 metres from Rose Cottage, so it wasn't easy.
I take it then that you're of the firm view that the most likely cause for this particular fire was lightning strike.
That's correct.
No, that concludes my examination.
Thank you, Mr. Castleton. Ms. Woodland, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Detective.
Your Honour, Mr. Wilcox will take the next witness, which is Detective Inspector Debnam, who will be appearing by AVL.
Thank you, Mr. Castleton. Detective Inspector Debnam, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Detective Inspector Debnam, I'm going to swear you in. Do you wish to take the oath for the affirmation?
Oath, please.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Would you please state your name, rank and station?
My name is Sasha Marie Debnam, Detective Technical Inspector of Police from Southern Region for Crime Scene Services Branch.
You provided 2 statements to this inquiry, did you?
Yes, I did.
And the first is as to cause and origin dated 17 October 2020.
That's correct.
And you also provided a statement dated 5 October 2020 going to property impacts from this fire. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
The matters in those statements true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
And is there anything you wish to amend or correct in those statements?
Not at this stage.
You have training and experience as a fire investigator, do you?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you briefly describe that training and experience?
So I'm employed by the New South Wales Police in the Crime Scene Services Branch. As part of my training in that area, I've completed both the structural fire examination course and the wildfire examination course.
As part of your investigation, you obtained some lightning strike data, did you?
Yes, I did.
And was that through the GPATS system and you obtained it through the Rural Fire Service?
Yes, that's correct.
And does GPATS stand for the Global Position and Tracking System?
Yes, it does.
You also obtained some weather data from the Bureau of Meteorology, did you?
Yes, I did.
And the closest weather station to the Good Fire was Cooma Airport, approximately 35 kilometres southwest of the Good Fire location. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
You undertook a cause and origin investigation for the Good Fire on the 18th of February 2020, accompanied by the officer in charge and another local detectives Waldron and Bruce, did you?
Yes, I did.
And did you receive any information as to an earlier investigation by the Rural Fire Service?
Yes, I did. I've been provided with some fire mapping and also the location of a GPS location of a tree that was suspected of being struck by lightning.
And you understand that the Rural Fire Service, through its John Smith and Mr. Mike Fraturo, had previously completed a cause and origin investigation in January 2020 for the Good Fire. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm aware they had attended.
And where was the location that you attended on the 18th of February 2020?
So the location was just south of 2116 Durangle Road at Durangle.
And what name was that property known by?
So I have to refer to my notes on that, if that's okay.
That's right. I suggest it's Rose Retreat.
Yes, that's correct.
And can you describe to Her Honour the nature of the general area of origin that you attended?
The area was some remote homesteads within bushland. It was an area that was characterised by a number of ridges and sloping ground in the topography in the area. It was wooded with mostly eucalyptus forests and small associated brush.
And you attended upon the coordinates that you'd received from the RFS, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you find some natural or other boundaries to the general area of origin?
Yes, there was a fire trail at the bottom end of the ridge. So we came from up top of the ridge and tracked the fire down the hill towards the fire trail.
You then identified a suspected point of origin having regard to fire indicators, did you?
Yes, that's correct. As I moved down the hill, I could see a number of different fire indicators which indicated the direction that the fire had been moving in. These indicators included wraparound on trees, where the fire, as it burns up a hill, will wrap around the front of a tree. There was some sooting on the rocks, which indicates the direction, and also foliage freeze, which is where the wind generated by the fire causes the leaves to freeze, pointing towards the direction the fire is moving in.
Just to examine some of those fire indicators, I'll have brought up page 232 of the brief. Do you have the red pagination in your brief with you?
I do.
Bringing up page 232, can you describe the significance of the burn indicator that is now displayed?
Yes, so you see the charring on that tree, how it's higher on the right-hand side. That is where the fire has wrapped around the front of the tree as it burned. You also see an area towards the base of the tree where there's some what's referred to as alligatoring, so the linear crosshatch pattern there where the fire has been burning against the base of the tree for a longer period of time or at higher heat, which causes that. And the longer it burns or the hotter it is, the deeper that alligatoring becomes.
Is it called alligatoring because it resembles an amphibian scales?
It does.
And moving further up the tree to the next page, 233, which I'll have displayed. What is the significance of that indicator?
So that indicator is a closer view of the wraparound feature of that fire. So where the fire burns low and it burns up and it wraps around the front of the tree, indicating that the fire is moving up the hill.
Turning to the next page, 234, which I'll have displayed. That shows sooting, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So exposed surfaces of the rock are sooted, and you can see from the direction where the heavier sooting is on the area that's facing the fire.
Thank you. The other indicator you earlier described is over the page at 235, which I'll bring up.
Yes.
What does this show?
That shows leaf freeze. So leaf freeze is basically where the moisture is taken out of the leaves of a tree, but in combination with wind. So it freezes them in that position. They'll stay that way indefinitely until the leaves fall off, indicating the direction.
Thank you. The other matters that or the other indicators you had regard to, weren't they, were advancing fire, flanking fire, and backing fire. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And how do those indicators assist your investigation?
So advancing fire is the term that's used to describe the overall pattern of indicators, which shows a fire is moving forward, usually at a greater speed. Flanking fires appear on the side of the fire. So essentially, if you have a fire and it's on flat ground, it will tend to burn in a circular direction out equally in all areas unless it's acted upon by wind, topography, or some other factor. So the indicators that we then get, so advancing fire shows that it's running straight ahead, and it's basically all the fires will be, all the indicators will show that it's moving in a forward direction. Flanking fires appear on both the left and right hand side, provided they're not prevented by topography or any other factor, and they show that the fire is gently spreading out laterally from the main thrust, which is going forward. And a backing fire is basically towards the heel of the fire, which is the back end of the fire. The fire will creep backwards from there at a slower speed than the advancing fire generally.
So in this case, the advancing fire was moving from west to east along the ridge, is that correct?
Yes, moved up and then spread. Once it hit the ridge at the top, it spread in either direction. But on the area where I was looking at, it was advancing up the ridge.
And by moving up, do you mean uphill as well?
Yes, that's correct.
So all of those indicators that you had regard to gave you an indication of where the fire moved, in other words?
Yes, it did.
You also completed an investigation the following day on the 19th of February 2020 by helicopter, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And what, if anything, did that part of the investigation reveal to you?
From the aerial examination, was able to track in an overall sense the direction of the fire and how it had spread.
You concluded ultimately, didn't you, that you were unable to determine a definitive point of origin for the fire due to some factors. Is that correct?
That is correct.
One of those factors was time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
How was that relevant in this case?
The initial reported fires in the Good area had occurred on the 29th, had commenced on the 29th of December. I didn't examine this scene until mid-February. So the passage of time can change or alter indicators just by the very passage of time. During that time period, weather may affect it. And also that fire had been burning within containment lines for a number of weeks, which then I can't preclude the fact that that fire has moved through that area in a number of different ways.
And how was weather and lightning at all relevant to your ability to determine a definitive point of origin in this case?
In terms of the weather conditions, as everyone would be aware, the conditions that summer were prime for wildfire to have occurred, hence the emergency. There was a large dry lightning storm, which meant there were numerous lightning strikes over time in that period and in that area.
And there were numerous lightning strikes in that area over a 48-hour period, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
And you identified that as between 27 and 29 December 2019?
Yes, that's correct.
You also had regard to experienced firefighters observing the fire from the air in its initial stages. They observed that the fire was not behaving in a typical manner. How at all did that impact your interpretation of the fire indicators at the scene?
When the fire is being reported as not being acting typically, that means that you can't draw the same strength of conclusion as you can from an indicator normally. because it's doing things that are unexpected.
And that makes it harder, doesn't it, to interpret the direction of the fire went in having regards to those traditional fire indicators?
Yes, it does.
In any event, you came to a likely conclusion as to cause and origin in this fire. What was that?
In terms of the area of origin, I concluded that the fire originated in an area generally south of the property, located at 2116 Durangle Road at Durangle, and west of the property located at 2118 of Durangle Road at Durangle. In terms of...
Oh, please continue.
So, in terms of the cause, I concluded that it was likely to have been natural cause, as in it's likely that the fire started due to any one of a number of lightning strikes in the area, which were recorded in the 48 hours prior to the report of the fire on the 29th of December.
And you identified a particular lightning strike of interest recorded at 4:04 p.m. on the 28th of December 2019, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you concluded that all the data from the scene investigation indicated that the fire had started within a 200 to 250 metre radius, generally north of that lightning strike, did you?
Yes, I did.
And are you aware that there is some room for error in terms of perhaps 200 to 250 metres in terms of the accuracy of pinpointing recorded lightning strikes on the GPATS system?
Yes, I am.
And when you considered that there were multiple lightning strikes in this case, it's the case, isn't it, that you noted during your scene examination a number of trees in the general area of origin that was snapped just below the crown or fallen. How was that relevant to your cause and origin investigation?
So that occurs, snapping of the crown at that area can occur for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons is it could be struck by lightning. However, wind can also do that. So that was relevant in terms of it could be indicative of numerous lightning strikes, or it could be indicative of the act of wind or weakening of the crown due to fire, and then subsequent breaking during that time period that had elapsed from the time of the reported fire to the time of my examination.
How long did it take you to access the suspected area of origin from your entry at 2116 Durangle Road, Durangle?
It took some time, in excess of an hour, I believe.
And was it easy to access the general area of origin, or
it was very
not easy?
difficult.
What
Very
made it
difficult.
and what made it difficult?
The terrain. Largely, it's a remote, isolated area. So the area that we were attempting to go through required us to go on off-road tracks. It also, you would drive up to a certain area. There was a lot of trees falling across the roadway, which meant that we couldn't easily access. And then it's a matter of just hiking through. The area is also bounded by a number of post and wire fences. So because there's different properties, so it's not clear access in any sense.
You excluded as likely causes, it was your evidence that there was no evidence that the fire was deliberately lit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's your evidence that there was no evidence to indicate that the fire was caused by human activities that were reckless or unintentional in their actions?
Yes, that's correct. And part of that determination came from the fact that it was such a remote area that it's not likely. The nearest residences were about 1 kilometre away from the point of origin.
Is there any evidence which causes you to consider human behaviour as a possible cause of this fire?
No.
And is there any evidence to cause you to suspect any cause other than lightning in this fire?
No, the area doesn't have any train lines, any power infrastructure or anything like that, which may be a cause. There's no indication that there was any logging activity or any welding industrial activity or anything like that, which may cause a spark, which would cause a fire. So in the absence of those things, they are excluded.
Yes, that's the evidence.
Thank you. Ms Woodland, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Detective Inspector.
No worries.
You're excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honour, the next witness is John Smith, who I understand is in the virtual waiting room. If Mr Smith can be brought in and sworn, please.
Mr Smith, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Can you hear me though?
Oh, Mr Smith, yes. You can hear us and see us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, loud and clear. I'll just ask the court officer to speak to you now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Castleton.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr Smith, would you please state your full name?
John Coronial Smith.
And are you a New South Wales Rural Fire Service authorised fire investigator?
I am.
Mr Smith, it appears to me you might be standing. You don't need to stand if you'd rather take a seat. Please make yourself comfortable. And have you provided recently, that is on the 22nd of June this year, a statement in relation to an investigation you undertook in relation to cause and origin for the Good fire?
I have.
Do you have a copy of your statement with you this morning?
I do. It's page
Does it?
2691 to 5.
Thank you. And are there any matters that require correction as far as you're concerned or not?
Not at this stage.
Are you still a serving member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
I am. I'm attached to Basin View Fire Brigade.
And what position do you hold within that brigade?
I'm an ordinary member.
Have you in the past attended multiple bushfires?
I have.
And have you been a member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service for in the order of 46 years?
I have.
And always as a volunteer?
Yes.
Have you at different times held position of brigade captain,
I did.
group captain,
Correct.
strike team leader,
I did.
task force leader,
I did.
divisional commander,
I was.
and of course, a volunteer firefighter?
Yes.
Have you undertaken a course of training in relation to the investigation of wildfire or bushfire?
I have undertaken a course in both wildfire and structural fire investigation, 2 separate courses.
In terms of the position of volunteer authorised fire investigator, over what period of time have you held that position?
8 years, 10 years.
10 years?
Yes.
And in that 10-year period, are you able to say how many cause and origin investigations you've undertaken?
I've been allocated 8 by the Fire Investigation Unit. Most of those were out west in Riverina, some on the coast.
And apart from that 8, have you assisted other RFS fire investigators undertaking cause and origin investigations or not?
Yes, yes.
And would you be able to put a number on how many you've assisted with?
Probably between 8 and 15, some on a formal basis.
Did you, I'll withdraw that, were you assigned to undertake a cause and origin investigation in relation to the Good fire in January of 2020?
I was.
And did that notification come to you by Cheryl Cook, who's the coordinator of the New South Wales RFS Fire Investigation Unit?
That is correct.
As part of your investigation, did you attend the Cooma Fire Control Centre?
I did.
And did you make inquiries with the superintendent, who was the incident controller for this particular fire, James Darrant?
Yes. We met Mr. Darrant the first day we were at the centre.
And as part of your investigation, did you work together with another RFS fire investigation, Mike Futuro?
I did.
And did you know Mr. Futuro before January 2020?
No, I didn't.
Did you come to learn in January of 2020 that he was a fire investigator such as yourself?
Yes, I did.
Now, what information, if any, did you obtain from Superintendent Darrant that was relevant to your investigation into the likely cause and origin of the Good fire?
This particular fire had, for administrative purposes, it had been, the paperwork accompanying it had been a bit changeable. We spoke to one of the personnel at the fire centre, Mr. Ray Nichols, and he was most helpful in getting a large-scale map and indicating where he thought or where he knew or where he'd been told by attending personnel where the area of origin might be, and that was Durangle Road at the back of. Now, I've got that place on my map as being called Rose Retreat.
Yes, that's certainly what I have as well.
Right.
And was that Rose Retreat, to your understanding, was a property that was located at 2116 Durangle Road, Durangle?
That's correct.
And did you come to learn that that was owned by Angus and Jane Ferguson?
No, we didn't. We weren't given the names of the owners. We were just given the location, and we put it onto a map and decided a grid reference, and then proceeded along Durangle Road.
By this time, you've got a working theory, I take it, as to the likely cause of the ignition?
We had looked at lightning data. I downloaded lightning data from GPATs, and we thought that might be a bit complicated because there's 34,000 strikes in the time interval, about 26 December through to New Year's Eve. So we decided to leg it out to Durangle Road and start from there. We basically had, we really didn't have anything in mind. We knew that there'd been a huge amount of lightning, but we were just going to look at a fire, determine its origin, with no preconceptions really. We knew there was lightning, but we weren't particularly looking for lightning. It was close to a house. There are other matters that need to be taken into account, but we had no prior conceptions.
When you legged it out to Durangle Road, was that on the 22nd of January, Mr. Smith?
That's correct, yes.
And did Mr. Futuro accompany you on that day?
He did, yes. We worked as a team on all the investigations that week.
Prior to attending Rose Retreat, had you undertaken an aerial inspection of the fireground or not?
No.
Did you undertake an aerial inspection at all?
Yes, later. It was determined that the weather up until at least Wednesday wouldn't be suitable for flying. So we delayed an aerial inspection of the two remotest fires we were assigned until the weather was better, and that was later that week.
Coming back, if I may, to the 22nd of January, when you and Mr. Futuro have attended Durangle Road, how would you describe the general area that you undertook your investigation?
We drove past Rose Retreat for about 200 metres. There's a fire trail, which I believe is called the Good Fire Trail. It moves south off the road, generally southeast. We went down there for about 400 metres. Then there was a freshly cut bulldozer fire trail heading to southwest. And that trail, heading southwest as it did, would take us to eventually directly south of Rose Retreat, maybe 800 metres.
Thank you. And is that where you commenced your ground-based inspection of the fire ground?
That's correct. We're at the downhill end of the fire, and there was the freshly cut bulldozer trail, then another trail whose origin I'm unsure of, and both of those trails were running at that stage roughly north-south, and the area we looked at was to the east of the easternmost trail. The two trails are parallel, each side of a fence.
And was there a particular methodology you employed on this day to try and work out the origin of the fire?
First of all, the country is really hard, hilly, horrible country, mostly rocks. The fire, a backing fire, we're able to determine that a backing fire had come from somewhere up that slope, and it had stopped at the fire trail to the western side of this area. So we crossed the fire trail and headed east, going up the slope. When we did that, I was quite surprised at the limited extent of advance to the north that the fire had made. Basically, the area to the north had only been impacted for about maybe 100 metres. So the fire certainly hadn't run in that direction at all. We had no indication about the weather or the time of the strike until later. And in that sort of country, you can't really depend on, like, the wind up there might be doing something, and because of the valleys and the hills, the wind down here is doing something else entirely. So I wasn't really able to use wind direction as any sort of indicator of the progress of the fire. So we just looked at, first of all, the northern boundary, where it was mostly indicators of a slow lateral fire and going uphill, as fires do. The rocks...
That's to the north.
No, uphill is to the east.
To the
The
east,
top of the ridge line runs north-south, and we were on the west side of the ridge line. And uphill, to walk uphill, you had to walk east.
In terms of the north, do I understand correctly, that's where you saw fire indicators consistent with lateral fire moving slowly in a northerly direction?
Yeah.
Or low intensity
The
in a northerly direction?
Northern boundary was only about 100 metres north of where we entered the site.
And in terms of the eastern aspect, did you observe fire indicators consistent with advancing fire?
Yes, certainly. Yes. Tree scarring and smoke indicators on rock. The broken rock on the surface was essentially what they call tabular, flat rock, and pretty easy to pick up the smoke staining, which indicated that the fire was proceeding uphill to the east.
Were you able to track those indicators that you've just described, and perhaps others such as foliage freeze or angle of char, back towards a general area of origin?
Not really, because the tree itself is in the middle of a pretty bare patch. there was minimal vegetation left. What it was low-growing tussocky stuff. There was foliage trees, and there were to the north a few branches that had been blown off the tree. But given that there was a couple of 3 weeks between the ignition of the fire when we turned up on ground, I really couldn't make any sort of guess about what caused that tree damage. It could have been subsequent wind. It could have been during the fire itself, but there were broken tree bits to the north and to the northeast, but I don't think they were relevant to the fire.
Did you make an observation of a particular tree that you formed a view of may have been struck by lightning?
Our attention was drawn to that almost immediately. We could see one tree that looked completely atypical as soon as we stopped.
I'll just, if I could direct you please, Mr. Smith, to your statement, towards the back of your statement. You've annexed a number of photographs to page 26915.
Yes.
Now, is that the particular tree that you were drawn to immediately?
That's the tree, and our attention to it was drawn mostly because of the severely charred stump that you can see on the right-hand side of the photo with a little X on at the top of it.
And what was it about the charred stump that drew you to this general location?
It's pretty hard to detect in the photo, but where you see black, a pattern called alligatoring, and it was fairly intense in that black patch. And so obviously the internals of that tree had been subjected to some pretty extreme heat. And I think more telling was the other part of the tree, the light-coloured one lying alongside it, which was presumably the rest of that tree.
And if we move back to 26913,
Yes.
is that the tree, the light-coloured tree, part of the tree you're referring to?
That light-coloured tree, yes.
And does this particular photograph demonstrate or features consistent with a tree being struck by lightning?
Yes. If you look
What
at
are those features?
just look at photograph 11, there's the typical bark finish of one of the trees in that area, and it's quite smooth. Now, the tree in 13, the bark is completely different. It's got those vertical ruptures running up it. And if you have a look at see the brown stains running up each of the fissures, I suspect that that's maybe the remnants of a sap that was exploded out through each of the fissures, but I've got nothing to back that up. That is a personal opinion. And I've not often seen trees where enough bark was left after a lightning strike to see those vertical fissure patterns. But it's
Mr. Smith, those vertical...
lightning running down the inside.
Thank you. In terms of the vertical fissure pattern or vertical rupture pattern or vertical fracture pattern, however described, what, in your opinion, is the likely cause of that and the mechanism for it?
If we assume a lightning strike, you're looking at a huge electrical current. It will travel the path of least resistance. In a dry tree, that's generally down the outside where dirt and dust is in the surface of the bark. In a green tree, a path of lower resistance is what's called the vascular cylinder, and that's the sap-bearing layer directly under the bark. There's tubes going up called xylem and tubes going down called phloem, and they're full of liquid, sap and water. That liquid is an easy path for an electrical current, considerably easier than the bark or the internals of the tree.
And if we assume that a green tree, as you've described it, has liquid or moisture, such as water or sap, and that acts as a conductor of electrical current, what then, in your opinion, is the cause for those vertical fractures or ruptures that we see in this photograph?
Huge electrical current would have instantly vaporised any liquid under the bark. The bark would have tried to expand to accommodate the sudden production of steam, and it will rupture along its longitudinal rather than radial. The radial's much stronger.
And this phenomenon that you've just described, did you observe other evidence of that occurring towards the base of the tree?
Yes.
And do we see that at page 26914?
You'll see that, yes, in 14.
And what does Her Honour see in that
there?
photograph that relates to perhaps the conducting of an electrical current?
In 14, it's a trench that's been explosively extracted out of you can see each side, the lighter colour of that rock. The root may have been between 150, 300 millimetres below the surface, and it exploded and dug itself a slit trench about 1.5 metres long. And you can see fairly obviously right in the middle of the photo, the accompanying char marks where presumably where the current exited the base of the tree, or the remnants of the current.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Did you form an opinion, if not at the time of your inspection on the 22nd of January, but shortly thereafter, that the most likely cause of the ignition for the Good fire was lightning strike?
Just at that stage, we formed an opinion this tree has been definitely struck by lightning. Then we walked up to the top of the ridge line and then did our typical, it's described as serpentine, zigzagging back down to look. And we probably covered about, in a north-south direction, 300 metres, certainly in the northerly direction. We went to the edge of the fire impacted area. The southerly direction, we went to the edge of the impacted area, and it had run from somewhere around that struck tree. It had run maybe 60 metres up a slope till it got to the ridge line. And we have we observed indicators that showed that it was an advancing fire till it got up to the ridge line. And then indications are a bit difficult after that. I suspect that it got to the ridge line, the north-south ridge line, and was subject to a completely different wind.
Did you make any observations of any other trees on the 22nd of January that may have been struck by lightning, other than the one that we're discussing?
No, we could see trees that had been damaged by wind. We don't know when, but that was the only indication of a lightning-struck tree.
You mentioned earlier in your evidence, Mr. Smith, that you undertook an aerial inspection some days later, correct?
Not of that area. we only did a ground-based inspection of the good ignition.
Thank you. In terms of the likely cause of the ignition, did you form a view that the most likely cause was by lightning?
I went through the standard template we have for this and was able to eliminate everything except lightning.
And when you say eliminate, are you referring to other potential causes that may involve human activity?
Yes.
What about power lines? Were there any power lines in the area?
No power lines in that vicinity at all.
Can I just ask you to look at page 26916? It's a photograph of the tree that we were discussing earlier. Do you see that there seems to be a branch of the tree running through the centre of the stump?
Yes, it's an optical illusion, actually. It's a broken off branch on the downhill side of the tree, and that other branch behind is actually lying on the ground a couple of metres behind the tree. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that to ensure that someone hadn't placed a branch into the tree as a marker.
No, you can see the burn around it. There would have been a sort of a bark burr where that branch came out, and the lightning's cooked it pretty well.
Following your inspection, did you record at about the time of your inspection some notes?
Yes.
And have
those notes are an RFS template, an investigation report.
And did you rely upon those contemporaneous notes of your investigation in January of 2020 to complete your statement that you signed last week on the 22nd of June?
I did. The vast majority of that statement was actually put together the afternoon that we visited the fire, and it's on my computer.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That concludes my examination.
Ms Woodland, do you have any questions?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you very much, Mr Smith. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Your Honour, that concludes the oral evidence in relation to Your Honour's inquiry into the Good fire. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief of evidence tendered as Exhibit 59A, as well as the oral testimony of Detective Senior Constable Ben Wardrum, New South Wales Police Officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Technical Inspector Sasha Debnam, Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command, New South Wales Police, and just now from Mr Smith, New South Wales Rural Fire Service Fire Investigator. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the cause and origin of the Good fire. In that regard, can I foreshadow now, for the benefit of my learned friend, that formal submissions are likely to be made that the fire commenced in a remote area approximately 800 metres south of a property known as Rose Retreat at 2116 Durangle Road, Durangle, near the Good Fire Trail as a result of one or more lightning strikes within a 48-hour period between 27 and 29 December 2019 in the vicinity of GPS coordinates latitude 35 degrees 56 minutes 14 seconds south and longitude 149 degrees 20 minutes 18 seconds east. Your Honour, that concludes my closing remarks. Could I ask Your Honour to formally stand this matter over to the 5th of September 2022?
Yes, I do that now.
Your Honour, that concludes today's hearing. Your Honour, I understand we'll resume the inquest into the death of Michael Clark tomorrow, and then on Wednesday, Your Honour will commence Your Honour's inquiry into the Creewar cluster.
Thank you, Mr Castleton. We'll adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
May it please the Court.